This is the AV lecture for Lab 7. In this lecture, we're going to be talking about the integumentary system. The integumentary system is mostly our skin, which is the largest organ of the human body. And within our skin, we're going to have some associated structures that are within this integumentary system. And those include things like the hair, nails, and a bunch of different glands that we'll discuss in this lecture. The integumentary system and the skin have a bunch of different functions, one of which is thermoregulation, which really just means controlling our internal body temperature. Naturally, our body temperature is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, and our body will maintain that body temperature through digestion of food, through muscle contractions, but also through excreting sweat through sweat glands that are associated with our integumentary system. The skin is also going to serve as protection. We're going to need to protect our bodies from UV light, which is harmful radiation for our cells. It's going to resist trauma and infection. This is going to be our first line of defense for any sort of virus or bacteria that's trying to get into our system. And it's also going to protect us from water loss. If you recall from our AV lecture 6, when we were discussing tissues, your skin was made up of stratified squamous epithelium, and it was keratinized. And that keratin basically made sure that we would not lose excess water, and it would also protect us from abrasion, and it would also protect us from viruses and bacteria. And then the skin is also going to be involved in sensations, so things like touch, pressure, pain, temperature, and even emotion. If, for example, if you are embarrassed, you might start to sweat a little bit. This is going to be a response that's involved in the integumentary system. And then also, the integumentary system is going to synthesize vitamin D. And this is going to be occurring when your skin receives sunlight. And vitamin D is really important for calcium absorption from your digestive system. But really, this complicated biochemistry is going to occur in the integumentary system. For those of you that drink dark sodas like Coke or Pepsi, there's an acid called phosphoric acid that's found within this soda, and this actually will block calcium absorption. So you can have, if you eat all the calcium, you've got all the vitamin D in your system. If you drink dark soda, that's effectively going to prohibit any calcium absorption. Your integumentary system is made up of two regions. First is the epidermis, that's shown in red, and the dermis, which is just deep to the epidermis. The hypodermis, which is deep to the dermis and indicated here, is not a layer of the integument or the integumentary system. This layer serves as an anchor point for the dermis, and this is a highly vascularized region, and this is where if there's any sort of subcutaneous injection, like some sort of drug or medication, this is where doctors will inject that medication into this highly vascularized region. Now, if we look at just the epidermis, that's again the most superficial layers of your skin or your integument. Recall that this is made up of keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. This is avascular, meaning that there is no blood that goes to your epidermis. There are also very few nerves in your epidermis. All that's going to be in deeper layers. And the epidermis is made up of 5 different layers. Stratum basale is the deepest. Stratum spinosum is 1 layer superficial. Stratum granulosum is a next level superficial. Then stratum lucidum, that's 1 more superficial. And the most superficial layer is the stratum corneum. And we have a little mnemonic device here for you to help you out on a practical quiz. And that is, can little guys or girls shoot baskets? And we're going from superficial to deep here. So can refers to corneum, little lucidum, guys or girls, granulosum, shoot spinosum, baskets, basale. Now let's go into each of these different layers or stratum of the epidermis here. The first, this is the deepest layer, stratum basale. We're indicating it with this red arrows, and it's region number 1. This is a single layer of cuboidal or columnar cells attached to a basement membrane. And this is where cells undergo mitosis, cell division. And we have 2 types of cells here. We have keratinocytes, which produce keratin. Keratin is a tough protein that is also found in your hair and your nails. And we also have melanocytes being produced here. And melanocytes are going to be cells that produce melanin or skin pigment. And what melanin does is it's going to protect your skin from UV radiation. We only find this in the epidermis, and it's only in this layer of the epidermis as well. Melanocytes differ from keratinocytes because keratinocytes are going to gradually migrate superficially, but melanocytes are not going to do that. They're going to stay in this stratum basale. So basically what happens here is the melanocytes produce melanin at the stratum basale, and then those get added to keratinocytes. And so these keratinocytes are going to contain keratin, but also melanin. And as they migrate up to these superficial layers, when they get to that most superficial layer, these cells are going to be fully keratinized, but they're also going to contain melanin. Our next layer is the stratum spinosum, layer number 2, indicated here. And you can describe this layer as several layers of keratinocytes thick. It is the deeper layers of the spinosum are actually still going to be undergoing mitosis. There's going to be some overlap here. And that helps to push these cells superficially. When we get to the superficial layers of the stratum spinosum, mitosis is going to end here. But we're still those cells will continually become keratinized as they migrate superficially. Next is our stratum granulosum, indicated here, layer number 3. And we describe this as 3 to 5 layers of keratinocytes in thicker areas like your palm of your hand or your feet. This could be a little bit thicker. And this typically stains pretty dark on our cells. And that's because the cells contain a lipid-rich, oily substance at this layer. And this is where we're going to have our waterproof boundary of the epidermis. And this prevents the skin from dehydrating, and it also prevents the body from losing excess amounts of water due to evaporation. Now, because we have this waterproofing layer, this also is going to cut off any of those superficial layers to a nutrient supply. And this is where, given that we're forming this waterproofing barrier, this is where cells are generally going to die at this layer. At the stratum lucidum, which is indicated here, which is number 4, this is not going to be a region of the epidermis that is throughout the whole body. We only find this region at the hands and your feet. And typically it stains a little bit lighter. In here it's kind of this lighter pink, but sometimes it can appear almost translucent on slides. And here cells are, they have died, they're fully keratinized, they have melanin, and so we don't see any nuclei or organelles of the cells in this layer. And then our most superficial layer of the epidermis is the stratum corneum, indicated here. And this is a layer of completely keratinized cells, and it's a pretty thick layer relative to some of these other layers of the epidermis. We are constantly shedding these cells, and the cells have no nuclei or no organelles here. And because we're constantly shedding these cells here, we need to be regenerating these cells, obviously. And so your skin actually renews every 6 weeks. So every 6 weeks, you basically have a new, completely new epidermis. And just to give you an idea of how many cells you lose, you roughly lose about 1 pound of stratum corneum each year. And if you consider how small a cell is, just a flake of skin is so light. An actual pound of that is pretty remarkable. Now we're moving into the dermis. Again, the dermis is going to be deep to your epidermis. And on this image on the right here, we have this wavy line. That's the boundary between the epidermis and the dermis. So these deeper layers here are going to make up our dermis. And again, down here we have our hypodermis, but this is not part of the integumentary system. The function of the dermis is going to offer structural integrity to your integument. Recall that the composition of the dermis is made up of dense, irregular connective tissue, and that allows you to for your skin to be extremely flexible and tough. Remember, the arrangement of the dense, irregular connective tissue was kind of haphazard with random collagen fibers moving all over the place. And that allows for this connective tissue to be strong and resist stress in multi-directional space. In the dermis, we're also going to find blood vessels, so this is where your epidermis is going to get its nutrient supply. We have nerves, all sorts of sensory receptors for light touch and deep touch. We also have hair follicles as well as glands. And the dermis can be broken into 2 different layers. The most superficial layer is called the papillary layer. And the papillary layer is mostly composed of areolar tissue. And remember that areolar tissue is that tissue with a lot of space between these connective tissue fibers. And why might you think that's important? Well, we discussed that the epidermis is not going to have a nutrient supply, and it's all going to be coming from the dermis. And because the dermis needs to feed the epidermis nutrients and it needs to provide vascularization, having this papillary layer composed of areolar tissue, this allows for nutrients to flow between the dermis and the epidermis. That wavy line that was the border between the dermis and the epidermis, these are going to be called dermal papillae, and they're extensions of the dermis that go into the epidermis. And these are going to have a few different functions. One, there's going to be sensory structures in here for detecting touch, but also this is going to make up your fingerprints. And because there's no real set or determined way that these dermal papillae will be arranged. This is why individuals have unique fingerprints. The deeper layers of the dermis are called the reticular layer, and this is really the thickest part of the dermis, and the reticular layer is made up of mostly dense irregular connective tissue. And then within the dermis, we are going to find other types of connective tissue fibers and other structural proteins. And so we're going to find collagen, elastic, and reticular fibers throughout the dermis. Now let's go into more detail about that papillary layer of the dermis. On this image, we're showing the epidermis here, and then this darker color, this is the dermis. And the papillary layer is everything in this region that's indicated by the red arrow. So the most superficial layers of the dermis. And again, this papillary layer of the dermis is going to be made mostly of areolar tissue, which allows for nutrients to flow from the dermis to the epidermis. And this projection here into the epidermis is called the dermal papillae. In these deeper layers of the dermis, we have the reticular layer, and this is made up of dense, irregular connective tissue. Now, the dermis is going to mostly be involved in, or is going to be the part of the integumentary system that's most responsible for thermoregulation. And this is because blood vessels are located in the dermis. They're not located in the epidermis. And so we can use our blood vessels to control body temperature here. So down here where it says heat regulation, if we have an increase in body temperature, our body is going to respond by vasodilation, which means this is going to, we're going to increase our blood vessels, and this is going to increase blood flow, and this will result in releasing heat. So we're getting rid of heat this way. Likewise, if there's a decrease in body temperature, we want to conserve as much heat as we can. And so we're going to do vasoconstriction of blood vessels, and this is going to decrease the size of our blood vessels. And this will result in decreased blood flow, and so this ultimately results in less heat being released into the epidermis. And so we're conserving heat here. Now we have some sensory structures that are found in the dermis again. In the superficial layers found in the dermal papillae, we have structures called the Meissner's corpuscle. And the Meissner's corpuscle is responsible for light touch. And so this is, for example, if a fly walks across your hand, your Meissner's corpuscle will pick that up. If wind blows on your face, a Meissner's corpuscle will sense that. And this makes sense because these are superficial layers of the dermis, and they're projecting superficially into the epidermis, and so they're going to be more likely to detect this light touch. We also have structures that will sense deep touch, and deep touch would be when you're sitting in a chair and Pacinian corpuscles in your butt are going to sense that you're sitting in this chair. If you lean against a wall, sensory structures in your arm and shoulder will detect that deeper touch. And these sensory structures are called Pacinian corpuscles. And they're located deep in the dermis in the reticular layer. And they're going to look like this in lab. They will always be isolated on slides, the ones that we use in lab. And they kind of look like an onion if you were to cut it in half, do a transverse cut of your onion and look at it from that plane, this is what it typically looks like, or maybe like a grape or something. But again, these are all about deep touch. Now you also have various glands within your integumentary system, and you have 4 types. Sudoriferous, which are your sweat glands. Sebaceous, which are sebum. Ceruminous, which produces cerumen, which is essentially earwax. And then lactiferous glands, which produce milk. And let's first discuss our sudoriferous glands. Sudoriferous glands are sweat glands, and we have 2 types. We have merocrine and apocrine. And merocrine are the most numerous types of sudoriferous glands. They are temperature sensitive, and so if our body heats up, they are going to cool our body down by releasing sweat. And it's a pretty simple system here. It's just essentially a tube that's running from the dermis up to the surface of the epidermis, out a sweat pore. Apocrine is a little different. These are going to be glands that are associated with a hair follicle. And so it's going to be a tube that leads directly to a hair follicle. And this produces sweat, but it also produces sweat with fatty acids in it. And this can be produced in response to stress or sexual stimulation. And these glands are responsible for body odor. Sebaceous glands are glands that secrete sebum, or oily substance. And these are going to be flask-shaped glands with openings into a hair follicle. And these provide waterproofing and lubrication for your hair. And so if you've ever experienced having greasy hair, that's because of your sebaceous glands. That oily sebum substance, that grease that we refer to it as, is really called sebum. And shampoos are designed to remove that oily substance from your hair, even though a certain amount of sebum is actually healthy for your hair because of these functions. It's waterproofing and it lubricates your hair.
Now we're going to discuss structures that are associated with hair follicles. First structure we have is the dermal papillae, shown down here outlined in the black box. This is going to be where the hair follicle receives blood and other nutrients, and also where nerves are going to be associated with the hair follicle for sensory input. Next we have the hair bulb, which is indicated down here in this green box. And this is the actively growing portion of the hair follicle. Next is our root sheath, which is right here, and it's called a bulge on this diagram because it does, in fact, form this bulge here. And it encloses the hair follicle, and this is going to be the source of stem cells for cellular growth of the hair. We have our sebaceous gland here. We've discussed this in detail. This is the gland that produces sebum and gives you that greasy hair. And then we also have our pileo-erector muscle, which is right here. And this is a involuntary muscle made of smooth muscle. And this muscle is responsible for making your hairs stand on end. So anytime you've gotten goosebumps because you were cold or because you were a little scared, you can thank your pileo-erector muscle for this. Now this is somewhat of a vestigial trait, meaning humans have lost a reason to, or a survival reason to have this muscle present. But if we consider our evolutionary ancestors who were likely covered in hair head to toe, this muscle would allow them to make themselves appear bigger if they were threatened by a predator. This muscle would make their hair stand up on end. It would make us look bigger, make our ancestors look bigger, and so this might scare off a potential predator. Another possible reason why we have this muscle from an evolutionary standpoint is that it increases insulation. And so by increasing the amount of warm air that our body produces under a big coat of fur, this might be able to keep ourselves warmer in colder temperatures. So likely our ancestors had this muscle for one of those reasons, or potentially more, and we have just maintained this muscle over time. So that's the end of AV Lecture 7. I wanted to take the time to give you an idea of what to expect on a practical quiz so you can start preparing. First of all, you should be comfortable identifying the epidermis and the dermis, the two regions of the integumentary system, using either a microscope or a model. You should also be comfortable with identifying each strata of the epidermis and giving a function or a characteristic for each of those strata. You should also be comfortable identifying sensory structures within the dermis, the Meissner's corpuscle and the Pacinian corpuscle, and which regions of the dermis they're found in. You should be comfortable identifying the different glands using a microscope and a model. And then you should also be comfortable identifying structures that are associated with the hair follicle.